Progress. Hi, today I'll be talking about the research I've been doing under Dr. Vishnu Shri Kumar at the Cognitive Science Laboratory in the Manda Lab. My project is called the Experience Sampling of Spontaneous Thoughts. So, yeah, I'll begin presenting now. I hope you're able to see my screen just. Yeah, that should be good now. So to begin with, experience sampling is a unique sampling design, which is frequently used in psychology to have more ecological validity. And when I say ecological validity, what I mean to say is how transferable are the results from this study to our real life setting. So, for example, studies in the memory domain or in the broader cognitive or intelligence systems domain has been done in controlled lab environments, right? And so they do not exactly transfer or tell us about the real world experience. So, according to some research, it suggests that since experience sampling happens throughout the day in the real life setting, so people are sent these notifications on their mobile apps, which they get to fill. And so it's done in a much more open environment where the participants can be much more themselves. So this has an edge over the systemic lab based environment that we have. So the area of interest when it comes to my project is that I'm measuring a couple of variables in in combination to experience sampling. I'll start talking about the variables that I have here. So the first variable that is inhibitory control. So inhibitory control refers to our own ability to regulate our actions to meet our goals. It's mentally very effortful. If, for example, if you have a certain goals to focus on, then it's our ability to eliminate all other things in the surrounding and focus just on the goal, right? So it is usually measured by the Stroop task or the flanker task, and I'm following a combined paradigm by Barzikowski et al. Second variable of interest that I have is emotion regulation. So I don't think it requires much explanation, but it is our ability to, adapt our emotions in order to best fit the situation. So it is also like inhibition control in a sense, but it is much more emotional. Inhibitory control, I would say, is much more of an organic capability, but emotional regulation is much more, about how you can modify your own emotions in order to best fit the situation. So I'll be measuring this using the emotional regulation questionnaire. And now I would like to introduce a couple of terms which may come across later in the presentation. So the first thing is mental time travel. So researchers have suggested that of all the species that are there in the world, we humans possess a very unique capability that we can go back in time and think about moments that we have lived, and we can really those moments, or we can think about certain things in the past that we didn't do, or we should have done things like that, and also anticipate things in the future. Like maybe you're just sitting in a room, but you're thinking about your future life, how it's going to turn out in the next 10, 20 years, right? So that's about it. That's actually mental time travel. Now a much more specific thing within mental time travel is the concept of involuntary autobiographical memories or thoughts. So that's like autobiographical memory is our memory about our own life, so that is why it is called autobiographical memory, since it pertains to ourselves. And when I say involuntary thoughts, so these are memories that we don't really have control over. So you would be studying, but something from your past might just pop out, out of nowhere. You might be thinking about the summer you spent at your nanny's place, right? And another one is like involuntary future thoughts. So these are thoughts in which you are anticipating the future, or looking ahead in the future and thinking maybe this might happen, or maybe in 10 years I'll own a home, or something like that, right? You get the idea. Yeah. So now talking more about the research. Uh, what I really want to understand is people have these really spontaneous thoughts, right? They're thinking about sometimes they're thinking about the future, sometimes they're thinking about the past, or they're thinking about the present because our brain never stops thinking, right? We're always having these thoughts. So, what I really want to understand is what are the contents of these thoughts, right? And what is the temporal orientation of the of these thoughts? When I say temporal orientation, what I mean to understand is whether the thoughts are arising out of the past or about the future or about the present, and also specify how further in the future or how further in the past the thought was. So also looking at the age spectrum where the participant has traveled within when they're thinking about it. So what I really want to understand are the factors which play a role in this. So some of the participant level factors which I'm interested in is your ability to control your regulate your own emotions, or your inhibitory control. So I talked about it previously. So I want to understand people who have, let's say, a higher inhibitory control. How do the spontaneous thought process vary between people who have high inhibitory control or low inhibitory control, or people who have more positive oriented emotional regulation strategies as compared to people who might have maladaptive emotional regulation strategies. And the recent research in psychology domain has started focusing a lot more on what we call as context. So context is nothing but context is nothing but the supporting environment that there is. So humans are very dynamic, but there are certain factors which lead to certain behaviors. So that's why we also really want to understand in which specific context does a specific type of thought occur. So I'll be talking much more in detail about that later. So, talking about my experiment flow, so participants first fill out a demographic questionnaire, and then they move on to, an emotional regulation questionnaire, and then they move on to the inhibitory control task, and lastly, they're taken to a SEMA app. It's an app which is used for experience sampling. Now, this app is free access to researchers, and it allows me to send my participants notifications at random time intervals, and they can fill out those surveys through which I assess their spontaneous thinking process. Now, the measures that I'm using are these following. I'll not talk much about details since I only have like very less time. Yeah. So now I'll be talking about my pilot findings. So as part of the last 2 months that I've been here, I've been able to finalize my pilot data collection and do some preliminary analysis. And based on these analysis, I'm now making certain changes to my design. So hopefully, I'm thinking about continuing the project further, like working remotely once the Srishti thing is completed. So yeah, coming to my pilot findings. So my sample included of 34 participants, but 3 participants were excluded because they had color blindness and which impacted the inhibitory control task. Mean age of the population was 20, and the population was student population. So the first thing that I really wanted to understand was the mean level predictor, or the participant level predictor. Let's say high somebody with high inhibitory control and somebody with low inhibitory control. So I was thinking that there would be some sort of a difference, given that people with higher inhibitory control are much more able to regulate their behaviors, which best fit their goals. So if let's say somebody who has high inhibitory control and is studying and is having these thoughts which are not related to the present, they might be able to regulate their behavior such that they're not thinking about, let's say, the future or the past, and they're thinking about the present. So how I calculated this was the reported thoughts, or all over the thoughts that they had reported. From those thoughts, I calculated the ratio of the present thoughts, and then I did a t-test on people with high inhibitory control and people with low inhibitory control. But contradictory to my hypothesis, I was not able to find a difference between the two types. So people with high inhibitory control and people with low inhibitory control. Um, Yeah, I had also thought that, there are two basic emotional regulation strategies that are there in research. So one is a cognitive reappraisal strategy in which, you think about the situation in a more positive light, or you try to change your emotions which fit the situation that you're in by, expressing your emotions, talking about those emotions, right? And the second emotional regulation strategy is expressive suppression. So you don't really talk about your feelings and you bottle them up, right? So mostly researchers suggested that the later kind, where people bottle up their emotions, they have the tendency to have intrusive thoughts, which might indicate that, they are much more likely to think about emotion laden spontaneous thinking. Like if they're having thoughts about the future or the past, they might not be at an advantage to have a control over those, right? But again, contradictory to my hypothesis, I did not find any significant difference. Although, yeah. Um, next, when I talked about context, right? So participants were also asked what their emotional, how they were feeling right now. When they got a survey, the survey has a sequence which is also randomized. Sometimes, like there's a probability, so that there are no order effects. So yeah. So when it came to emotional context, we hypothesized that there would be a clear difference between, the thoughts that had happened when the participant was feeling positive, and the thoughts that had occurred when the participant was feeling negative. And we also asked the participant to report the balance of the thought. So first they're stating what emotion they're currently feeling, and then they're stating the thought that they had, whether it's positive and negative. So, what we found was that there was a clear difference between positive emotional context and negative emotional context. And we also found out that these contexts were correlated. So, if somebody is in a positive state, they were much more likely to have thoughts which were positive, and if they were in a negative emotional state, they are much more likely to have negative emotional thoughts, right? So this suggests that our thinking, our thoughts are context based. So it's an interesting thing to note here, So let's say if we are trying, if so yeah, so basically what it suggests is that the emotion of the thoughts that we're having is dependent on the emotion that the person is feeling right now. So yeah, this is a graphical representation of how, the difference between positive and negative thoughts, like positive and negative emotional context. Yeah, so these are some of the preliminary findings that I have come across. Um, so now moving forward, we're going to do some more exploratory analysis because we have other sets of variables as well, like the attention span, what kind of activity the participant is doing. Like, are they in a much more attentionally controlled environment, or are they in a much more free environment? We also have a variable called social context. If is the person in a social setting, or is the person in an alone setting? Those kinds of things. And currently, we're also doing a linear regression model, a generalized linear regression model, and also a multiple linear regression model where a multiple regression model where we're looking at how the responses within the person is varying, and we're also looking at mean level differences. So what we have done is we have created two categories, high inhibition control and low inhibition control, and within that we're looking at the variability in response of each individual. So right now it's a much more at a a beginner level, but that's something that'll be really interesting with this kind of data. It's also a little tedious to do it, but we're hoping to get some good results out of that analysis. And the pilot data that I've collected has given me some insight into my experiment design. That is that, for example, we found a lot of future oriented thoughts, then past oriented thoughts. So one key insight from there is that we have a student population. So students will be much more, thinking, would have thoughts related to, let's say, the internship that they want to go to, the jobs that they want to find. So these kinds of things, right? Age, what goal is the participant currently pursuing? So that will determine if the participant is thinking about the past or is thinking about the future, right? So there are a lot of factors now that we have to cater to since we got this pilot data, and it's telling us a lot about how sampling diversity should also be looked at when we are conducting these kinds of studies, especially with human participants. So now we are going to revamp the experiment a bit and then look at how we can go further with the project. And yeah, finally, we'll be submitting the IRB for this study in some time after the pilot is done. Yeah, and we're hoping to make some good changes, and we're also finalizing the results section of like how we're going to do the statistical analysis. What kind of, let's say, tests are we going to look at, or models we're going to look at. Those kinds of things are still in process. And I hope to continue working with Dr. Vishnu on this project and see where it goes further.